dance like a monkey. Move, 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 move like a monkey. Shoot, 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 shoot like a monkey. Kill, 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 kill like a monkey. Dance, 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 dance like a monkey. Move, 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 move like a monkey. Shoot, 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 shoot like a monkey. Kill, 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 kill like a monkey.
Hello, everyone. How are we all? I think we all, for the most part, know why we're here. And Lewis supplies most of the context unwisely in the video that we're about to watch, so... I suppose I should have some kind of preamble. We missed Dune Month, so I guess we'll make some nod to that. It is by will alone that I set my mind in motion. It is by the juice of bodacious bourbon barrel-aged red blend that thoughts acquire speed, the lips acquire stains, the stains become a warning. It is by copious amounts of alcohol that I set my mind in motion. That's thematically resonant, but we'll see why in a moment. So. Oh, that is flattering. Do I even want to explain? Why don't we just dive right in? Hey Sunday, how was your Thanksgiving? I am in Canada. My Thanksgiving was fantastic and well over a month ago. On self-destruction and exploitation. A vegan response to ContraPoints. Not the first vegan response to ContraPoints. This is in response to a tweet that Perspective Philosophy made towards Contra. Well, it's a little bit difficult to explain without putting it right before us. I believe he actually includes the tweet itself right here, so maybe we'll look at this briefly, just to get the context down pat before we let him prattle off. Contra was tweeting about tofu. She doesn't like tofu. But it takes on the flavor of seasonings. You know what does that way better, though? Meat. I find it impossible to believe that anyone actually likes tofu. What do you like about it? The lack of taste or the lack of texture? Tofu is not a meat substitute. However, it is very good if you use it for what tofu is intended for, that is, not as a substitute for meat. But that's not what we're here for. Perspective Philosophy, in his infinite wisdom, decided to reply thusly. Surely, at ContraPoints, a drug addict could do with learning some self-ish denial. Just another internet socialist incapable of restraining their greed. There are a number of things going on here. The obvious is shaming somebody for a dependency on drugs. I actually don't know anything about Natalie Wynn's personal life or her personal struggles, but I'm going to assume, for argument's sake, that Perspective Philosophy does. The shaming of drug addiction combined with the implication that drug addiction is a failure of the will, such that the remedy to addiction would be self-denial. He's gonna double down on this pretty hard, but this got ratioed to hell. People did not like this. In fact, I think you can see on my screen, because I have YouTube Premium, look at those dislikes. That is a ratio. If ever I saw one. But that has no bearing on whether or not what he's saying is apt. It's not. It's Perspective Philosophy. But we'll let him speak first before we judge. Shall we? I'm sure he has reasons. I'm sure. Let's begin.
So ContraPoints and many other people on the left would have you think that veganism is a virtue, a noble sacrifice done by some sort of monastic individual capable of absolute self-discipline. As if I'm sitting here in the hills of Tibet after a 24-hour meditation cycle. Of course not. Veganism is not about virtue, it's about vice. It's not about being a saint, it's about not being a sinner.
Okay, tell me that wasn't the most unhinged thing you've heard today. At least. Like, dear God. This is damage control. This is him trying to look good. What a nutball. Oh God, that's deafening. We'll turn this down a little bit. Cool intro, though.
So before I begin, I want to make one thing abundantly clear. I'm not downplaying anyone's struggles. I'm not undermining anyone's hardships. I understand that self-destructive behaviors can be absolutely, unbelievably detrimental to an individual's life and freedom and happiness. And I've experienced the very same self-destructive behaviors in the past, whether it's in my relationship with addiction or in OCD when I've compulsively washed my hands until they've bled.
OCD is not addiction. Addiction has... this is such an apropos still to stop on. Addiction has nothing to do with a simple compulsion to perform an action. Addiction has to do with the body's dependency on substance in order to function either at all or to function in a way that is bearable. It is not equivalent to having a compulsion. OCD is can be serious for a lot of people, but it's not the same thing as needing to wash your hands when you see something unclean or something like that. So he has no idea what he's talking about.
I understand that self-restraint can be absolutely painful and difficult and even beyond a given individual's capacity at a single time to engage in. But the reality is that unless we recognize our own responsibility in relation to our actions, we will never be free from those compulsive or harmful behaviors that we engage in. And so any good therapist will tell you the road to recovery is through accepting the responsibility for your actions.
I haven't been to a therapist. Can anybody confirm this? Because this doesn't sound right to me. I would like a citation for that. I have a lot of difficulty imagining a person addicted to some substance going to a therapist and them going, you just need to take responsibility for your actions. Like it's a dependency. The Greek word is akratic. You're in a situation where you actually lack the power to fix yourself. That's why people hold interventions. That's why people need to go into therapy and into treatment centers. It's beyond, and he even acknowledges this seconds ago, so I don't know why this is confusing him. It's beyond the power of a person by will alone to, God, I'm thinking of that Dune quote now, but by will alone to simply deny themselves access to a substance that, in many cases, substances to which we are addicted aren't just unbearable on a sensational level to withhold from us. Sometimes it will actually kill us. You're pretty sure this is a Jordan B. Peterson talking point? It's possible. I mean, he plays up being a quote-unquote socialist and being sort of vaguely on the left, but I think he's a snake. Nothing I've seen actually indicates that that's where any of his actual proclivities lie. I mean, for God's sake, he in his argument for objective morality, he begins with an Ayn Rand quote of all things. I don't think he has the faintest idea of what people in leftist spaces are actually receptive to, which indicates that he's not familiar with them because he doesn't freak with them because, they're not hospitable to his actual positions. Yeah, literally just bootstraps logic. This is preposterous.
And it's something that I've struggled to do in the past, and it's something that all of us struggle to do every day of our lives to varying degrees. So I recently tweeted ContraPoints, a position which I thought was less controversial than clearly it is.
Then you're an idiot. Because the average person is not going to take, especially in circles that are empathetic towards people who deal with things like addiction and with the myriad different things that cause people to fall into addiction, for you to treat that as if it was the result of a personal failing. This video is the result of a severe personal failing. But drug addiction, and by the way, drug addiction can mean a host of different things. It doesn't necessarily mean illicit drugs. Somebody mentioned that this was a Jordan B. Peterson take. Jordan B. Peterson is a grossly unethical and irresponsible person, and I think that almost any critique you can make against him is apt, with the exception of one. He fell into a benzo addiction due to personal crises going on. Specifically, I believe his wife had cancer. I don't know what the state of his wife is, actually. But he deteriorated severely, and you can see the results when when he goes online now. He looks very different. It's done a number on him. And that is one thing that I would never hold someone personally responsible for. Why? Because, like most addictions, it is brought on as an attempt to medicate against very serious personal trauma. And the drug itself creates a dependency so easily. I went briefly on, even something mild like Ativan can do that to you. I went briefly on that for a little bit to deal with my own anxiety a few years ago, and I was terrified of it. I would only actually take out the minimum, the minimum dose, or the minimum prescription, rather, that they would allow you to take. Not that they would allow you to take a minimum, but it's typically like 10 pills is the smallest, is what I asked for. Because I knew that, like with like my anxiety symptoms, I was so vulnerable to being dependent on this. And I had relatively mild stuff going on in my life. If you combine like anxiety disorder, say, or any number of other things, or even just a severely traumatic experience, create that need to ameliorate unbearable symptoms and sensations and emotions, it becomes very easy for even the most responsible and hardworking and disciplined people to fall into addiction. It has nothing to do in and of itself. Like, people can make bad decisions, of course, but it has nothing to do in and of itself, especially once you're already addicted, with a failure to just discipline oneself and deny oneself a pleasurable activity. That's not what it is at all. Exactly. I love how randomly bringing up out of nowhere someone's drug addiction somehow doesn't represent something controversial to perspective philosophy. It actually completely does. It completely does. It completely does. I am sure. I mean, it begs the question. There are so many anti-vegan takes online. Why is he going after Natalie? Because she has a large audience, and he wanted to score a dunk. And he was aware of Natalie's struggles with some kind of addictive drug, or some kind of addiction. I'm unclear as to the details. I don't typically keep tabs on people's personal lives like that. I'm not that kind of person. Apparently, Lewis is. But he knew about that and decided, they're contemptible in the same way that carnists are contemptible. I can combine these and, oh boy, I'm going to get so many subscriptions from this.
About how addicts could learn self-denial. And this was in response to her tweet, in which she said that a vegan life was barren and destitute. And, of course, being a vegan and...
I mean, that's obviously tongue-in-cheek. She's talking about the fact that vegan food is often pretty bland. Sometimes it's pretty creative, but I'm not going to lie. A lot of vegan food is just not satisfying. I suspect it's more satisfying when you're kind of acculturated to expecting it, but it's, you know.
Seeing the harm that could be done from a tweet like this, and seeing her numerous tweets and numerous engagements with veganism, which have ultimately led to her engaging and continuing to engage in exploitative behaviors, obviously I was upset. But not for myself, but for animals. Billions of animals die every year. 46 million died for Thanksgiving alone.
No, I don't think you were upset, and I'll tell you why. If you cared about those animals, you would have thought about the fallout of that tweet on the reputation of vegans in public, because you embarrass them. Whether or not your followers or even the majority of vegans online are smart enough or astute enough or whatever word you want to use to actually take into account the impacts of optical disasters like this on their capacity to have any sort of efficacy with respect to cultural attitudes towards meat eating. You put the reputation of your channel, the growth of your channel, you put your ambition to score an epic own on ContraPoints above the movement. You didn't care about these animals. You may pay lip service to it. You may tell yourself at night, I am a hero. I'm out saving the innocent bunnies from slaughter, but no, you're not. In practice, what you are, the altar on which you will sacrifice these creatures, is this little purple robot here. That's really what you're about. Because you took no pains to protect this. None. But here you are, minutes, I suppose hours, after you get ratioed on Twitter, suddenly you're here defending yourself.
So, it's no small issue. We are living in an age which is a mass genocide. And I think that as long as huge influencers who have the power...
That's not really accurate. A genocide would be targeting the genus, right? It's the elimination of a species. Typically, you want to be minimally sustainable so you can continue to eat the turkeys. I mean, I take what I get the spirit of what he's saying. He's talking about mass killing. And genocide is just super double plus bad. Mass killing in the lingo of people who don't care about the meanings of words, but, you know. Whatever, maybe I'm setting my expectations too high. I just thought he was a philosopher.
To normalize and denormalize our most unethical habits and behaviors, continue to perpetuate norms and conventions which cause the suffering and death of billions of animals, I think that it should be called out. But I also saw a poetic irony in this. It seemed that an inability to restrict oneself was causing both the self-destruction of this individual and the harm of the other.
I too see a poetic irony. An inability to restrict yourself, Lewis, led you to harm yourself, as indicated by this odious video and the destruction of your reputation. But you did something else too. Let's go back to that tweet. And this goes back to why I am not actually cool with people mocking Jordan Peterson's benzo addiction. Surely ContraPoints, a drug addict, could do with learning some self-denial. Who does this target? Well, it adds ContraPoints. There's only one ContraPoints. It also references a category of person, drug addict. What this tweet says to a massive audience, to a massive array of people, is that to Lewis, drug addicts are just moral failures. They are people without the capacity, or really, without the discipline, or without the moral concern, without the care, without the strength of character. People who are too degenerate to deny themselves some base pleasure for the sake of some greater good. You threw all of those people who struggle with addiction under the bus just to hurt ContraPoints. Not that you really cared to hurt ContraPoints, because the purpose of this, truly, was just to grow your channel. Because there's no other practical purpose to doing so. You could have targeted a factory farmer's Twitter account. You could have targeted any number of things. You didn't care.
Selves and for others span what this video was about.
Hang on, where did we leave off? I should take account of timestamps when I jump around.
Hedonistic desire which leads this individual, but I also saw a poetic irony in this. It seemed that an inability to restrict oneself was causing both the self-destruction of this individual and the harm of the other. It has the same solution. It's the same ethical issue, just on two separate sides of the same coin. We can see exploitation and addiction as part of a self-perpetuation of hedonistic desire which leads to the exploitation of an individual.
Yeah. So, if you or a loved one suffer from addiction in life, maybe you start taking drugs in response to trauma. Maybe they're prescription drugs, maybe they're illicit. Maybe it's something nobody tends to think about anymore. Then that's just their moral failure. They're just hedonists. They just care more about pleasure than about the things that matter in this world. Lewis knows this. He's a psychiatrist. Or something. What is he again? Oh yeah, he's a philosophy grad student who can't read Hegel for shit.
In the case of animals, in the case of meat eaters towards animals, it's of course the exploitation of another. In the case of addiction, it's the exploitation of the self by the self.
No, it's not the exploitation of the self by the self, you idiot. This is an unhealthy amount of wine to drink in one night. If I drink this every night, my body will start to expect it. It will start to, I don't know the actual biology of this specifically, but it'll start to behave in ways that assume the presence of this, which means that if I suddenly stop after drinking a heavy amount of alcohol every single night, if I suddenly stop, my body is going to react in a very bad way, because it has come to depend upon the presence of this chemical to regulate my system. If I drink an obscene amount of alcohol, I should say an extreme amount of alcohol, that's more accurate, with simply withholding alcohol from myself could kill me. Often people need to be weaned off of addictive substances in order to survive withdrawal, and sometimes they can't even be weaned off completely. Sometimes it permanently affects your system. This is really perverse, Lewis. You don't know a thing about what you're talking about. You were addressing huge amounts of people. I'm not so much concerned about you addressing them under the auspices of being a philosopher, because I don't think anybody is going to make that mistake anymore, but you are seriously misinforming and insulting a great many people whose situations you know nothing about. Which isn't that surprising, because judging by this, you're not even entirely clear about your own situation, are you? This was a very tactically poor move. You look really bad. Really bad.
Both have the same solution: self-restraint. And this is what this video is about.
Also, meat eating isn't an addiction. It may be unethical, given that we may have reasoned ourselves to the position that the current modes of producing meat are in some way immoral. Maybe in many ways immoral. And yet we decide, simply for the pleasure of eating meat, to continue to engage in it. Potentially. There are other arguments, like maybe, for example, simply withholding would not realistically cause any difference. It wouldn't save the life of any animal. Therefore, from a certain vantage, it's just a meaningless gesture. Or you may hold that meat eating isn't bad in and of itself, but there's an unnecessary amount of cruelty and waste and environmental harm in the way it's currently conducted. But it's not an addiction. People don't suffer from meat withdrawal in the same way they suffer from withdrawal from alcohol or antidepressants, other stimulants, illicit or otherwise. Google meat withdrawal. If meat withdrawal is a thing, that's going to be hilarious, but I don't think people are generally... People will say, oh God, I'm going to die without a hamburger or something like that, but you can actually die without a drink if you suffer from severe alcohol addiction.
Self-restraint. Self-restraint is not in fact a bad thing. I've spoke about this in my response to Lena norms and on countless occasions in relation to objective ethics. The reality is our consideration for ourselves and for others spans from the same rational engagement with our desires. The fact of the matter is, ethics is about behaviors and desires.
Drug addicts they just have an irrational relationship with their desires. A little bit strange. Desires aren't typically rational, they're typically pre-rational. This is one of the reasons why in Platonic philosophy, for example, there's this huge emphasis on musical training and childhood education. Because you need to condition somebody to prefer goodness, assuming you can for argument's sake. Assuming that makes sense, even metaphysically or philosophically or whatever you want to say. This is just nonsense.
How we regulate those behaviors and desires in terms of restraint and endorsement, and that's what ContraPoints tells people to do all of the time: to restrain themselves, to do better, to try harder, and ultimately be a better person. She perpetuates norms and conventions of equality, which is exactly the same thing I do. But to say I then actively undermine a social justice movement because of our own preferences was disconcerting.
For you to actively undermine the vegan movement, not even for preferences, just out of spite, from what I can tell, a combination of spite and ambition and pride. It's not really disconcerting, because I have zero expectations for you, at least none that I would for somebody I'd expect to have a character, but poetic irony indeed.
So I decided to show a comparison which references her own experience in relation to animals. And I believe I've done that.
Yes, I believe you have. In fact, I believe you in addition said, when somebody called you out on this, I showed ContraPoints the same empathy that I show to every other animal. There's a reason why that's problematic, and it's not because animals are worthless. We, to a certain extent, are actually unable to be truly empathetic with animals. Why? Or rather, sympathetic is probably the more accurate term. Because we don't actually have a way to communicate with them one-to-one. We don't have the same experiences they do. When we look at an animal, we can't actually see ourselves. We can imagine that there's something common going on there, and we can care about it. There's nothing wrong with that. I think that's a fairly good thing. But you didn't upgrade animals by this comparison, Lewis. You downgraded ContraPoints to a turkey or a rabbit, or a mouse, or a pig. You demonstrated disregard, and you were simply justifying your own cruelty. And it's not even as if you could refer to the efficacy or aims of that cruelty. You didn't save any lives. You didn't stop anyone from consuming meat this Thanksgiving. In fact, what you accomplished probably was just out of pure spite. A whole bunch of people saying, fuck it, I'm having a turkey this year. Or something. Turkey's a lot of work. Probably something else. For somebody poking ContraPoints for her asceticism, he sure does indulge his own narcissistic tendencies, indeed.
The reality is they have the same solution. I care about Natalie, I genuinely do. And
here's the kiss of Judas. No, you don't care about Natalie at all. You don't care about Natalie one bit. That's why you dragged her personal struggles out into the public to ridicule her over some silly tweets about tofu. You're kind of a piece of shit, aren't you, Lewis? I am generous to a fault, I think. I have a tendency to fight with people I end up being friends with afterwards because I'm passionate about things and a little bit of a hothead. Actually, quite a hothead. But typically, when I interact with someone and I see that there's something honest motivating them, or if they're sincerely mistaken about something, or sometimes I learn myself, you know, I can start to relate to them and I can start to be generous, even if I vehemently disagree with them. There are even some right-wingers that I don't talk about for the sake of their safety, frankly, who I have some empathy for, if not sympathy with, because I understand where they're coming from. There's something human and relatable in what drives them to their positions. And even if I disagree with the ends that they arrive at, and even if I will fight with them tooth and nail should they ever try to enact the ends that they arrive at, you know, I can treat them gently in a context. I can't treat you with empathy, Lewis, because I don't relate to you as a creature at all. You look online and you see Natalie as a rock to climb on. She isn't a person to you. You will eat her for the sake of promoting your brand, which is pretending to not eat meat. But let's be brutally honest here. The net result of your platform, judging by this interaction alone, and we can judge it by others, is to make the cause of veganism look terrible, to make vegans look like horrible people, which most of them are not, at least in my experience, which will have the result, ultimately, of promoting meat eating. So, no, you don't care about ContraPoints, Lewis. I don't know if you care about anybody.
I hope she recovers and lives a long, happy life. one which she does not harm other people and use her preferences as an excuse to do so.
I'll say the same to you, Lewis. Maybe minus some of those points, honestly, at this stage. I won't say which ones. Let me say this. Undoubtedly, I think you're a malignant narcissist, but I think you are sensitive to the fact, at least judging by this very quickly made response video, that you are sensitive to the disapproval of other people, and you are dealing with a tremendous amount of that right now. So I expect that you are staying up late tonight quite stressed out. And I'm happy for that, because discomfort breeds discipline and growth. Maybe that'll help you a little bit.
I want this to be clear, that the same reason I care about Natalie is the same reason I care about animals. It's the same reason I care about myself. It's the same reason we all care about anything.
Well, it's for the same reason that you care about yourself. You don't care about animals for the reasons I've just gone through. You are using the cause of pretending you care about animals, even to yourself. Well, not even the cause. You're just pretending to care about animals for the sake of promoting your brand. And if that results in the increase in the consumption of animals, I mean, you'll never say this, but so be it. And similarly, you will consume other people. You'll consume Natalie. You'll consume people who meet the description with which you disparage Natalie. This is evil. That's what this is.
Because subjectivity is inherently valuable in and of itself. In this regard, we are all one in ethical consideration.
Listen to how, like, zombie-like that is. Subjectivity is valuable in and of itself. What the hell does that even mean? First of all, it's a statement by itself, so that's unjustified. I mean, maybe it's true, but, like, you know, give me an argument. Give me anything. But second, subjectivity is valuable in and of itself. Think about that. Subjectivity. Not you. Not Natalie's person. Not her relationships. Her subjectivity. She bears a thing. Just this little abstract, undifferentiated element. That's what Lewis cares about. Or pretends to care about. Does he know what caring about something looks like or feels like? That's what I wonder. Because I would never describe someone I claim to care about as, oh, she's a creature bearing subjectivity. Like, how mechanical is... She's a creature bearing reproductivity. She's a creature bearing metabolism or something. Like, it's so hollow.
It doesn't matter what species, gender, race, or anything like that. None of those things matter. They're aesthetic differences. All that matters is the ethical foundation from which it's all built.
That makes no sense. The ethical foundation from which it's all... What does that even mean? What is that... The ethical... Where is he getting this from? You can't just make shit up like this, Lewis. It makes people you associate with look really bad. Like, is this so much to ask? Can we just not make shit up? It's so easy to just go, from the ethical foundation from which it is built, by which I mean, and then actually give an explanation.
Those lived experiences of all subjects within the world. So why did I choose the point of addiction? And
Because you're an idiot and you have zero regard for people suffering from addiction. You think they're inferior to you. Here's a question. Why didn't you open this with an apology? Sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. I was making this particular point. Like, even that would have been snake-like. but it would have shown like some semblance of remorse or something. At the very least, it would demonstrate that you recognize this isn't socially acceptable. Is there anything that Lewis could do where he wouldn't rationalize it somehow? Anything at all? Like, are standards just for other people?
Not, let's say, something else. And the reason is deprivation, self-denial, the restriction of desires. And how, in the case of addiction, it's clear-cut. We understand that the addict needs to restrict their desires.
No, the addict doesn't need to restrict their desires, you worthless parasite. What is it? The addict just needs to restrict their desires. I don't even need to embellish this. I didn't need to do this stream. This speaks for itself. Absolutely fucking unreal.
Of course, people on Twitter took this as merely restricting desires. Of course, none of these people have ever had to restrict their desires to the...
What are you talking about? None of these people... What do you mean? Hang on. ContraPoints has a following of thousands upon thousands of people. None of them have to restrict their desires? Lewis, are you like... Have you, like, met people before? There's something grotesque about saying addiction is merely a lack of restraint. It's a disease. It eats away at you. Vegans choose to be vegan. Addicts do not choose to have addictions. The self-righteous assholes should be thankful. They don't know the deep pain of it. Yes. Well said, Ravana, I think?
ever had to restrict their desires to the point in which it might cause an extreme pain and angst within their lives. And they may not have self-destructive behaviors, but I have.
Yes. Yes, you have. Yes, you very much have self-destructive behaviors, Lewis. I don't think anyone is going to impugn you with lacking those.
And I understand the pain and the suffering and the turmoil it can bring to...
I understand the pain of feeling like this gnawing in your stomach anxiety that makes you feel like you're going to die constantly for hours and hours and hours of your life while you suffocate, where the only thing that will make that go away is just one more drop of whatever it is that you're consuming. Or maybe it will actually kill you at that point. Like, no, Lewis. Nobody who knows talks like you. This stuff is serious. It has gravity. People being misinformed about this causes people to die. You have never experienced this. Just like you're pretending to care about ContraPoints, you're pretending that you have dealt with serious addiction. Which is why your point of comparison is not the addiction, but, oh yeah, I washed my hands so much that my hands bled. Yeah, that sucks. That's really rough. OCD is pretty bad. It's not the same. It is not the same. It is serious. It should not be made light of. The issue isn't that you didn't go through something bad. The issue is that you're using that to say, I have the mandate of heaven to refer to addicts as moral failures compared to myself.
Try and change yourself and be a better person. But that's all we truly can do. And so I want to really drive this home.
I bet you do.
Self-restriction can be our freedom. And without
Work will set you free.
it, we are lost. We lose ourselves to addiction. We spiral downwards into a path of destitution and dependence upon substances, or upon experiences, or even in relation to self-destructive behaviors like self-harm. These things can get a grip of ourselves, and really, we become the victim of ourselves.
Well, you certainly become the victim of yourself. But someone who's addicted to substances is actually quite frequently not the victim of themselves at all. They are dealing with very extrinsic issues that are unbearable. And often it creeps up on you. A tiny glass of wine in the evening, you deal with anxiety. You have one every night, you start to get more anxious. You start to need more because your body starts to get used to it. Eventually, you become dependent upon a very expensive liquid that is doing serious harm to your body, and you can't stop. Because it's not just unbearable, it actually hurts you to stop. Even if it's hurting you to continue.
And so when we restrain ourselves from these unethical desires of self-destruction, we are free. And that's what therapy is about. Therapy is usually based on bolstering an ego, making the individual stronger so that they can resist desires which are self-destructive, whilst also combating emotional and psychological issues which can lead to unhealthy and negative desires, to allow people to express their drives in a more rational way. And that's what therapy is about. And that's exactly why it's a subset of ethics.
What? Therapy's not a... Therapy's a subset of ethics. No, it's not. No, that's wrong, Lewis. Therapy is not a subset of ethics. Is there like a French guy somewhere who said that therapy is a subset of ethics? I have never heard that before. Anyone in the chat, can you give me any clue as to where on earth Lewis would get the impression that therapy is a subset of ethics? Let him try to explain. All right, well, let's watch. Jesus Christ! Oh, he's so dumb.
We engage in therapy to modify behavior for the same reason that we engage in ethics, to modify behavior.
No, we don't engage in ethics to modify behavior. Ethics has to do with the relationship of the well, it's a bunch of things, but primarily it's a combination of studying what the ideals of like the kinds of subjects that a society should produce, as well as an interrogation of the ideals that are the basis for, you know, those judgments, and then sometimes paying attention to like the institutional mechanisms by which that can be attained, and sometimes with its relationship to other areas like morality and whatnot. It's literally ethos refers to the character, specifically of a people or of a city or of a place or of a nation or whatever term you want to use. Therapy, by contrast, is a practice, and it's not a field of philosophy. So I don't know what the hell he's talking about.
It's all done for a common good. And that's what I'm trying to point out here. So ContraPoints and many other people on the left would have you think that veganism is a virtue, a noble sacrifice done by some sort of monastic individual capable of absolute self-discipline.
No, I don't think anyone is going to accuse you of being capable of absolute self-discipline, Lewis. I don't even know what to say anymore. This is astonishing. This is absolutely astounding.
As if I'm sitting here in the hills of Tibet after a 24-hour meditation cycle. Of course not. Veganism is not about virtue, it's about vice. It's not about being a saint, it's about not being a sinner in this respect. It's about not harming others.
Then why did you choose to highlight ContraPoint's drug addiction? Why? See, if you were someone who actually cared primarily about the plight of animals, as well as ContraPoints being an animal in this generalized sense of the term, I would expect you to do something like, "Hey, I know that you don't find tofu particularly to your taste. Just so you know, there are ways to make it taste better, and I think you should be a bit more careful because tofu may not be the most pleasurable experience for you personally, but the horror facing the animals that you are suggesting people consume as a substitute should be taken seriously." Something like that. And you know what? One of two things would happen. She would ignore him, overwhelmingly likely, or she would respond and go, "Fair enough. I don't agree with you, but fair enough. I respect your concerns." Or, third possibility, she mocks him and looks terrible for it. And in all three of these cases, either nothing happens or the cause of veganism is forwarded. Instead, he chose to make vegans look like condescending, vindictive, what's a word I'm allowed to use? Goblins. In the act of potentially harming ContraPoints and quite likely harming a large number of people who saw this, who were reminded of the fact that in the eyes of a lot of people in their culture, their struggle marks them out as a failed human being, which they're not. But that's the perception. He's an anti-philosopher. Yes, he is. He is an anti-philosopher. In the strongest sense, because philosophers are people who interrogate and try to understand. This is not a philosopher. This is a television preacher. This is somebody who flips through philosophy books to find pithy quotes to use to sell dogmatism. To sell dogmatism, because he doesn't actually care about the content. He cares about this. Purple robot with big number.
Rather than helping anyone. It's a virtue to be a kind, compassionate person. It's not a virtue to not beat people up.
It's not a virtue to not beat people up. Would beating people up unnecessarily be a vice, then? Because he's a charlatan? Yeah, he's a complete charlatan. You know, Haas from Infrared is ridiculous, but when I had him on that debate, and he called Lewis a fake Hegelian, he wasn't going far enough. Lewis is a fake philosopher and a fake vegan. Because, you know, maybe he's religiously vegan in his dietary habits. And maybe he never strays from advocating for veganism. But he does everything in his power to sell himself at veganism's expense. Which means that he is his own real idol. Exploiting himself, as it were. Oh, is he advocating to beat people up? No, he is beating people up himself. And looking terrible in the process, so maybe some goods come of this. Maybe people will learn not to follow this example, but this is actually abominable. How does one hate knowledge? I don't know. Ask, Discount Mads Mikkelsen here.
That is a baseline. Same thing with veganism. 46 million animals. All individuals feeling pain and pleasure, fear, suffering, crying out, usually in dark, cramped spaces, so that individuals can have a preference for their flesh. It's not something that can be mocked, laughed at, downplayed.
Like drug addiction. Yeah, see, I can do that too. You threw all those animals under the bus. Stop showing their picture on the screen. You did not save them. You contributed to people being contemptful of others who didn't do the odious things you did, who are actually trying to save those creatures, or make their lives less miserable, or anything productive, frankly.
It is the greatest moral travesty of our time. It is equivalent to a war, if not worse than most wars that are engaged in today. The outward, at least most of us recognize that war is wrong. Very few of us recognize the harm we do 3 times a day when we look at our dinner plates.
Okay, so you're a war prophet here. That's an interesting way to construe this, I suppose. Because you're not solving the problem, Lewis. You are chasing YouTube clout. Or Twitch clout, or whatever it is. I don't think you're very successful on Twitch. But you're chasing online clout. You're not doing anything. You're using resources acquired from an exploitative society, and I do this too, so I'm not blaming you for this, to acquire a philosophy PhD for pure vanity. Frankly, there are better ways to make money. There are better ways to get a vegan message out there than by desperately trying to mutilate Hegel. But you chose that one because it makes you feel good. And you do this because it makes you feel good. And you're cruel to people like ContraPoints and other people who you don't even think of who resemble the remarks you made to ContraPoints, in the expectation that doing so will lead to a state of affairs that makes you feel good, and you don't care about the actual consequences for anybody else. You're a snake, Lewis.
For equality and diversity. It's built upon the slaughter and exploitation of over 46 million animals.
So's this. If you are not contributing to addressing the problem, if you are in fact merely profiting off of the fact of a crisis, to say nothing of the fact that I would say there's a strong argument, I think we've established there's a strong argument that you are actually acting against people who are trying to solve the problem, you are directly profiting from this state of affairs and are doing nothing to ameliorate it. You have no defense except for, well, my channel advocates for veganism. Yeah, sure, but if you make veganism look bad, if you are doing odious things in the course of identifying as a vegan, attaching the stigma of the things that you do to other vegans, whose side are you really on? You say you're not a carnist, but frankly, you look like a thorough meat eater to me.
The most vital interests of sentient beings being defied for the mere preferences of those who want to sit down at a dinner table and give thanks for the very virtue that they are disregarding when they consume these animals.
I know this is a low blow, but who wants to bet that he hasn't done any research whatsoever into where anything that we are seeing in this room, including the shirt on his back, is produced? Because I would be willing to bet that a good number of the electronics, the books, the paper, the pulp, the plastic, the fabric, all of that is going to be made using severe exploitation and animal products somewhere. Animal products are not just used for meat. They are also used in machinery. They are used in all sorts of things. Did he care? Did he check? I don't know. Maybe he did. He didn't check when he addressed ContraPoints, so it doesn't particularly matter. But you know what? You know what? Fuck him.
I genuinely do not believe that you can endorse equality, diversity, and love, or benevolence even, for others, whilst continuing to justify their exploitation.
You are not locuting that the exploitation of those others is justified. But you are absolutely fomenting the idea that that exploitation is justified by your actions. But I'll agree with this. I don't think you love any of these things. I think you've been socially rewarded for pretending to. Nothing that you do is consistent with behavior that I would associate with love. You thought nothing of hurting ContraPoints. You demonstrated in this very video your contempt for the people that you threw under the bus to get at ContraPoints. You don't love anybody, Lewis.
If you recognize, Natalie, that millions of animals are being killed.
You addressed, I guess as a V, you addressed this to ContraPoints yourself. I didn't even clue into that. He hashtagged ContraPoints here. This is an address to ContraPoints. That went completely over my head. So you are actually telling this to ContraPoints' face. You are not a full man, Lewis. You are a purely appetitive creature. You've read Aristotle, maybe you know what that means. Frankly, I don't know if anything about you is real anymore, so maybe you haven't.
If you recognize the individuality of these animals that are being slaughtered, and you'll make jokes, you'll make excuses, you'll pay lip service to veganism, but you won't change your behavior, well, that's no different to self-destructing.
Indeed. Fuck this guy. What a disgusting creature. Truly. What an absolutely vile human being. What is there even to say? Like I'm trying to think of something to say in response, but I've got nothing except for speculation about whether this guy actually has something resembling an internal experience or something like that. Like I don't know how you can be this delusional. Which Aristotle book? That would be the Ethics. Or the Politics to a lesser extent. Natalie doesn't listen to her own audience, let alone some clout-chasing grifter. I don't think Natalie Wynn is going to be significantly hurt by this. I think the people who would be hurt by this are the people who are being referenced as moral failures for suffering from addiction. This is just really despicable. It's par for the course from what I've seen from this guy, but I forgave for a brief period that he is a complete philosophical incompetent. A total incompetent. He can't think to save his life. His use of Hegel is a few decontextualized snippets reframed as dogmatic statements with none of the reason justifying them, and even then he gets it wrong. But I could forgive that. If there was an actual person in there making mistakes, I could look past that. I look past that with a lot of people. I have zero. I have no empathy for someone who does this. This is the most serpentine, predatory behavior I have seen from... Well, that's exaggerating. I've seen way worse, but... This is up there. To stare straight at the camera, he doesn't see you as people. This is the behavior of someone who is entirely cynical and views human beings as just an element, a thing that you manipulate in a certain way to produce a certain desired result. Natalie Wynn wasn't a person, but more importantly, that phrase, that little phrase here, a drug addict. That's not a person to Lewis. See, he is the philosopher king. And these Socratic people who are addicted to substances, they are below bronze. These are the lesser beings whose sole purpose, a purpose that they fail to meet, is to make possible the existence of enlightened gods on earth like Lewis. Of course, he has to scrape the bottom of the barrel in order to win your approval. To subsist, it will not register that he is engaging in the most base kind of parasitism imaginable. And the most sinister. See, he's not taking advantage of his audience's fear, or his audience's greed, or his audience's lust, or his audience's hatred. He's taking advantage of their love. And then he is weakening the efficacy of people for the sake of his own ambition and pride, and selfishness, and hedonism. He is weakening the case of people who actually do lose sleep at night, because they see sentient creatures being brutalized in their dreams. And that's fine for him. He doesn't care. Look at him, he's healthy, he's calm, he's relaxed, he's composed. He's chillin'. This is fun. People who are consumed by the experience of real horror in the world aren't healthy. They aren't well. Never confuse nice, and this isn't nice, this is ugly as all hell, but never confuse politeness, certainly, with kindness. People who are happy and fulfilled and all together in a world where intolerable evil is taking place aren't right in the head. You should not be well if things that you believe have the same importance as a human child, say, are being brutalized. You should not be well with the knowledge that is happening constantly and that there is almost nothing that you as an individual can do about it. And a lot of people, by the way, who are haunted in that way, they fall into addiction to substances because they can't cope, because they're actually pained by it. This guy isn't pained by it. He's overjoyed. He's given an opportunity to demonstrate his greatness of spirit by his grocery habits. Anyways, I'm about 5 seconds away from throwing my glass, so I'm going to call it here. Thank you, everybody, for watching this. And, maybe a quick final word. If you are suffering from substance abuse, and I've never taken drugs myself, but I have dealt with substance abuse in the past. You're witnessing not substance abuse right now. I mean, maybe, I guess there's like 1/4 of this left, so that probably wasn't good. But, you know, like I'm familiar with the influence of not like hard drugs, but I've definitely, especially with the with my father's cancer, I drank well more than I should. You are not less of a human being. You are not morally weak. And you are not doomed. You are unwell, but there are just reasons for being unwell. In a sick world, it is not a mark of character that one is content. And if you're struggling with these things, you should try your hardest to stop, but also to the extent that you fail, that's not your failure. And you're sure as hell better than this boob, so we'll call it there. I'm probably too drunk to start talking. Everybody have a good night. Thanks for joining me for this public execution. Arrivederci.